us for this SRO webinar. We're going to start in probably 1 or 2 minutes. Just give folks a second to log on. My name is Molly Chase. I'm the Senior Director of Policy with the San Diego Housing Commission, presenting here today with Wendy DeWitt, our Vice President of Preservation, and with Marcus Sproul, our Program Manager. We are going to go through the PowerPoint that outlines many of the amendments we are making and proposing to make to the SRO ordinance, and then we are going to open it up to all of you for any questions. You can either raise your hand if you have audio capability and would like to ask a question. We'll give you control to ask your question, or you can put any questions in the chat and we will answer them in the order that we receive them. So thank you all for being here today. Just give it 1 more minute. Okay, next slide. So a little bit of background, as many of you already know and have been in part of the stakeholder conversations previously. In June of 2020, the San Diego Housing Commission presented the report Preserving Affordable Housing in the City of San Diego to the City Council. The report included a recommendation to strengthen San Diego's existing single-room occupancy ordinance. And so that's how we got to the actions that we're bringing forward today. In June of 2020, the Land Use and Housing Committee gave staff direction to return with a policy for discussion. Next slide. In July, the proposed amendments were presented to Land Use and Housing as an informational item. And that is when we started our initial round of stakeholder engagement, including a stakeholder meeting with SRO hotel owners, and a meeting with the Downtown Partnership, and a meeting with the San Diego Housing Federation. We are now back in that process again. So we have already started some stakeholder meetings and we'll continue some more. And we look forward to incorporating your feedback before we bring it forward to Land Use and Housing. At this time, we don't have an anticipated date secured for the Land Use and Housing meeting, but we will make sure to be in communication with all of you when we know what that time frame looks like. In November of 2020, the proposed amendments were presented to Land Use and Housing, and the action at the time was that San Diego Housing Commission staff work with the City Attorney's Office to draft the ordinance incorporating the proposed amendments, which we have been in the process of doing. Next slide. And then just a quick reminder, which you know all better than anyone else, the purpose of the SRO hotel regulation as stated in the San Diego Municipal Code is to ensure the retention of the existing number of SRO hotel rooms and to provide assistance to tenants of SRO hotel rooms that will be displaced by the demolition, conversion, or rehabilitation of existing SRO hotel rooms. And so now I'm going to pass it over to Marcus to talk about some of the main amendments that we're proposing.
Great, thanks, Molly. So just want to provide an overview here. There are a number of draft revisions and there's a lot of detail in the draft ordinance that is available for review, but just wanted to provide this overview that there's these 3 main areas that we're revising. And the primary reason really for the first part is to enhance the administration of the SRO hotel ordinance, make it a little bit easier for everyone to understand which SRO hotels are subject to the ordinance, which regulations apply and which don't, and to keep better track of these SRO hotel properties. The second part is to improve relocation assistance for tenants. This ordinance has been around for many years, and we've heard that the relocation assistance needs to be addressed, and it's not adequate currently for tenants downtown. So that's one of the areas that was looked at as well. The third is to incentivize preservation of SRO hotels and offer alternative compliance methods. And the idea here really is to provide additional options and some more flexibility. So we're going to run through 12 of the proposed amendments. Again, there's a lot of detail in the actual draft document, but this is helpful just to kind of guide the conversation and to highlight some of the important ones. So the first proposal is to conduct a process to identify and certify SRO hotel properties. As I mentioned, this would make it a little bit more accurate in terms of identifying which properties the regulation applies to, and also make it a little bit easier for the city staff, for the SRO hotel owners, potential buyers, the housing commission staff to understand exactly what applies to which property. Currently, there's no provision in the ordinance, so this would be a new process. The second proposal would be to add an exemption for SRO hotel replacement in exchange for deed restrictions at 60% of area median income for 30 years. And this would be added to a number of existing exemptions that are in the ordinance today. And the idea here, again, is to provide some flexibility, provide another way for owners to comply with the replacement requirement. The third proposal would be to allow the SRO hotel unit replacement outside of the community planning area. And that would be on public transportation corridors or near employment centers. So in the current ordinance, that is also possible, but it needs to be approved by the Housing Commission. And so this would be a by right proposal here that would be built into the ordinance. Again, making it a little bit easier for owners to, or potential buyers to replace the units. The fourth proposal would be to eliminate or reduce the parking for replacement SRO units if they're located in the same community planning area or if they're in a transit priority area that's outside of the community planning area. You know, we've heard parking is often one of the largest costs of these replacements. So this is, again, trying to provide some flexibility, make it a little bit easier to do the replacement. The fifth proposal, fairly straightforward, require a 30-year remaining useful life for the existing units that are offered to satisfy the requirements. So if you know, the second proposal, for example, if an owner was to convert units to 60% of area median income, well, those units would need to have a 30-year useful life to satisfy that requirement. And that's the first five. I'm going to turn it over now to Wendy DeWitt, and she's going to go through the remaining proposals.
Thanks, Marcus. The next proposal, proposal number 6, allows a partial conversion by owners of their SRO hotel rooms to another use, or where owners may want to combine SRO hotel rooms for purposes of providing additional baths or toilets, or to add other amenities that would maybe attract increased rents on a portion of the premises. And number 6, the amendment would allow owners to do this in exchange for recorded rental restrictions on the balance of the units at 60% AMI for a term of 30 years. This proposal would be most beneficial to those SROs with replacement requirements. Proposal number 7 would provide an opportunity for SRO hotel preservation by requiring the owners to notify the city and or housing commission of when they want to sell their units, if there is an intent to sell the SRO hotel property. Then the city and housing commission would in turn notify a list of qualified nonprofits and allow them a 45-day period to make an offer to purchase. And of course, the offer, you know, would be at fair market value for the property. And then the owners, you would negotiate like you would with anyone else, and it would have to result in an actual purchase contract within 60 days. So this way, there is an opportunity to preserve, and the city's aware of when an SRO hotel owner desires to sell. Number 8, this provision provides that the new development of SRO hotels are eligible for density bonuses and the incentives under the density bonus ordinance in exchange for a 55-year affordability as required under that ordinance. Proposal number 9 would allow SRO hotels to become receiver sites and potentially receive compensation for providing affordability covenants for another project that has affordability requirements or housing replacement requirements. You may recall that the city amended its inclusionary ordinance, and there is a new provision under the city's inclusionary ordinance where compliance can be met by the provision of rehabilitated SRO units. And next slide, please. The next proposal is to make property owners aware that if an SRO hotel owner desires to provide affordability in the way of covenants, they could be eligible for the county's property tax exemption if they structured their ownership as a nonprofit owner or manager and had recorded covenants. This could make the property eligible for a substantial property tax exemption. Number 11 is notifying SRO property owners that they would be eligible for rehabilitation financing from the San Diego Housing Commission when available in exchange for affordability requirements and a right of first offer should the owner decide to sell. One example of that is a notice of funding availability that is anticipated in June of this year that the Housing Commission will issue. 16.6 million available for preservation, and it does call out preservation of SRO hotels. So you may wish to be on the lookout for that NOFA if you are interested. And number 12, the final proposed amendment is to protect vulnerable residents by providing a lump sum relocation amount of $6,330 for each displaced resident, with an additional $2,000 lump sum amount if the resident happens to be special needs. The financial assistance for the displaced resident is based on HUD's downtown efficiency unit rent, fair market rent amount times 3 months, so it'd be three months rent. And next slide, please. That concludes our summary of the proposed amendments to the SRO hotel ordinance. And we are conducting stakeholder meetings now. This is our final meeting in a series of 3. And we do expect, as Molly mentioned earlier, to go back to the Land Use and Housing Committee, but we do not have a date yet. So we anticipate working through comments that we received from these SRO stakeholder meetings, and then hopefully take them to Land Use and Housing. So this concludes our presentation in this webinar. We're happy to take your questions and comments. And this last slide here that's just been posted provides the email address. If this meeting concludes and you think about something that you didn't think about during the meeting that you want to make sure we see or that we include, you can email it to this email address, and that our staff here at the Housing Commission will receive it. Or you can mail it to the address that you see on the screen at 1122 Broadway, Suite 300, San Diego, California, 92101. So thank you. This concludes the formal presentation, and we will look for your comments. You may raise your hand if you have a question or post something in the chat, and we will pick it up and try to answer your question to the best of our ability.
Thank you, Wendy. And so we'll get started with the questions in the chat. Thank you for putting those in there. I think the first question would best be answered by our General Counsel, Chuck Christensen, who's on the line. The question is in regards to the proposed changes impacting property rights of SRO hotel owners, no longer having discretion over who and where they can sell their property. So Chuck, I don't know if you want to take that question initially.
Yeah, sure. Well, from a standpoint of the amendment of the ordinance, we have to go through a fair amount of legal review continuing through the city attorney's office. We have not completed that yet. And we're having the stakeholder meetings in an effort to try to get input generally on concerns that the community has. But it will be vetted through the city attorney's office. They've seen it initially, but they go through a very detailed analysis. And so I think it'd be premature for me to weigh in on that issue at this time.
Thanks, Chuck. The second question looks to be about kind of the value of the properties and the current separate purchasing of hotels. And if there is an opportunity for the Housing Commission to buy SROs, and touches a little bit on if the owner can sell the property, so the sale piece. So I don't know if Chuck or Wendy wants to answer that.
Thanks, Molly. I'm looking at the question right now. So as I understand it, this noticing, I think the intent of the question is that the noticing would be to the city/housing commission saying, you know, would you be interested in purchasing? And then, of course, if not, then it could be referred to a nonprofit. That's definitely something that we could consider in that section of the intent to sell. Of course, if the City and Housing Commission receives the first notice of intent to sell, we could definitely consider it then. Or it could be that the Housing Commission, if there is an outstanding NOFA, it could be the Housing Commission ends up financing the purchase. So that would be entirely possible if the resources exist at the time. I'm not sure that would take additional language in that section. Maybe, you know, you could look at that section if you wanted to propose an additional sentence or something. We could certainly consider that. And the section references are in the list of proposed changes, just so it makes it easier for you to find it in the draft.
Thanks, Wendy. The next question is, without a proper notice, how can you designate a building that has never been on an SRO list as now subject to your restrictions? They were never given the option to opt out. I think that's a question for Chuck, and then maybe Wendy can, or Marcus can jump in after.
So the proposed ordinance gives an ability and notice to anybody who whose property is being proposed to be placed upon the list. And there'll be a full due process hearing that will occur with respect to each one of those items, with the right to appeals throughout. And then obviously, to the extent property owner was dissatisfied, there are judicial methods of dealing with that as well. But generally, as if the property has been operating as an SRO hotel and has all of the indicia of being that, and the owner is given the opportunity to indicate why a conclusion that it is an SRO hotel is improper, I think the notice and due process requirement is clearly met.
Thanks, Chuck. And then it looks like Will has raised his hand, so we're going to unmute you, Will, and allow you to ask your question.
Hi there. Okay. So, you know, Molly, Wendy, Chuck, Marcus. I know we're all kind of sounding like broken records because you're all coming back and saying the same thing and trying to sugarcoat this ordinance. And the SRO owners are all coming back and saying the same things over and over again. And I think it's going to go down that process, unfortunately, until this thing gets vetted either at city council or at the courts through the court system, which I hope it doesn't happen. But you know, the process, and Chuck just said this has not been fully vetted about the having to, you know, first right of refusal on selling the property. But this is one item that is really upsetting the SRO owners and upsetting and creating problems for us today. And that is that we're in the process of trying to refinance both Peachtree Inn and Trolley Court, which our loans are coming due next year. Conventional financing, we don't want to go through the Housing Commission because of all the red tape, and it's, you know, that's that money can be used in other places. We don't need it. But the first thing that the lender that's currently on the property asked us was, well, what are the current ordinances related to SROs? And of course, we have to reveal that this type of thing is coming down the pike to us. We can't just say, oh, say, well, there's no restrictions right now, but there may be in 6 months. I mean, we really have to let them know. And that's an impediment to our ownership. I mean, it really takes away our property rights. And saying that that this, by not being able to freely sell on the open market, and selling to a limited list of buyers is a sale at fair market value really isn't true, because when you limit the bidders, it lowers the price. The other things that are in there, like having to keep daily logs on tenants, even though we're month to month, and many of our tenants have been there for years. The ordinance just goes too far and it takes away our property rights. And unfortunately, we're going to have to fight you on this one. And that means that we're going to be taking funds that we planned on using for capital expenditures on the properties, and it's going to have to go to lawyers, which means like things like no new roof for Peachtree Inn, no new elevator for Trolley Court. The list goes on, and it's going in the wrong direction. We have been good stewards. We worked with San Diego Housing Commission. We've had a good relationship. And I've said before that in the 80s, when the SRO ordinance was created, we were at the forefront, the city and the developers were at the forefront of building some rules and regulations that became best practices around the country. And now it's a knee-jerk reaction to a problem that's greater than all of us. And you heard me say that at the partnership meeting a week or so ago, or last week, that this is not going to solve the homeless problem. And I've talked about my nephew who I lost, who lived on the street for 2 years before he lost his life in February. It's a tough situation, homelessness is, but don't try and put the monkey on our back, because we're a solution. We're doing things without public subsidy, and now you're taking away all of our rights and not allowing us to continue to operate as we should be able to. Thank you.
Thanks, Will. I think we agree that our intent is to gets to the beginning of to preserve these properties and keep them available for San Diegans, and we will continue to take your feedback. As we indicated, this is still in the stakeholder engagement part of the ordinance process, which is why we're hosting these meetings. And to Jack's point, we'll have further legal review as it goes to the city attorney's office. And to that point, the next question is around if we're taking into account the financial burden of maintaining the properties that owners have already, specifically around the Arlington Hotel. I don't know if Wendy or Emily wants to speak to the current NOFA that we have proposed in our next year's budget.
Yes, I can. Thanks, Molly. I can speak briefly about what the NOFA is about in general terms. We are anticipating releasing this notice of funding availability. That's what the notice is. The amount is 16.6 million. It's intended to preserve multifamily affordable rental housing, and specifically calls out the preservation of SRO hotels. It is for capital improvements to preserve naturally occurring affordable housing in neighborhoods where there's a high risk of displacement. It's for health and safety upgrades that the property may need. So those are the anticipated uses of funds. And so that's what we mean by the ability to take advantage of some financial assistance when we have it available. So I hope that that helps. But yes, we do understand that these are old buildings and they definitely need capital improvements to remain a quality rental affordable housing.
Thanks, Wendy. And I believe, Ronald, you also have your hand raised if you'd like to ask an additional question, or if Wendy's answer just got to the point of what you had put in the chat.
Hello, can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Just to fill in the gap on our problem at the Arlington, it's too late for us to look for funding. Our electrical system, which is 90 years old, had to be completely replaced in this past year, costing us over $150,000. We had to go from the sidewalk all the way through and up 4 floors with a whole new electrical system. And as that was being completed, we had a major gas leak, had to turn the gas off, and now had to replace at about $100,000. All the lines that would have, they're now going to be switched over to electric service so that we can power up new 34 new electric stoves, water heaters. The laundry has to be updated to electric. So we've just spent $250,000. That's just to keep the doors open. That's not to improve the project. So the additional financial burdens that this ordinance would put on us is going to be extremely difficult to face. And of course, our tenants, who are paying an average of about $650 a month, cannot be asked to share in the cost of all of these improvements. We will just put them out on the street if that were to be the case. Thank you.
Thanks, Ronald, for sharing that. And I think Wendy did address the resources we are putting out for next year, but we understand the issue was something that already had to happen in an emergency form. So thank you for your feedback. Currently, there's no other questions. We'll give you a minute or so if anyone wants to put additional questions or comments in the chat or raise your hand. Oops, sorry, too many. It looks like Debbie, you have your hand up. Can I unmute you if you want to ask your question?
Hi, Molly. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Good. Hi, everybody. I'm Debbie Ruane. I'm working with the SRO Alliance, which consists of a group of business people who own and operate single room occupancy hotels in San Diego. Before I make my comments, I wanted to let you know that there are at least 2 SRO Alliance members who can't access the webinar. And I wanted to confirm that the comments that you'll be receiving will be accepted by the Housing Commission until the end of the month. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. I want to state that we recognize the SROs are a crucial component of the housing stock, particularly in the downtown area. However, as Will mentioned, many of the proposed changes, and Ron for that matter, disincentivize the owners from future investment in these assets, which will negatively impact the city and the residents. We know there's a housing shortage, but for these properties, many of the current residents would have nowhere to go. Therefore, the SRO Alliance requests the City of San Diego and the Housing Commission continue to meet with the SRO Alliance and discuss the implications of these proposed ordinances on the buildings and the tenants, as well as the owners, in hopes of creating an ordinance that benefits this fragile population residing particularly in the downtown area and helps San Diego become best in class. We appreciate the comments made by Mr. Christensen and by you, Ms. Chase, and look forward to continuing discussions. Thank you.
Thanks, Debbie. And just to reiterate, anything that is either mailed in for a question or emailed into the address that was on the screen will be taken, as well as all the stakeholder input from the conversations today, as well as the 2 other stakeholder meetings, and specifically in regards to the SRO Alliance, so from our previous meeting and any future conversations we can have until it comes up to committee. So thank you, Debbie, for being here. Looks like there's a couple more questions coming in. Let's see. Someone's asking if we could explain how the Housing Commission is defining SROs for the purpose of the ordinance. Either Marcus or Wendy, Chuck. Oh. Wendy, are you muted? How we're defining?
Yes, I am. I was going to, sorry about that. I was going to pull it up. We're basically referencing the state law definition. There is, and the definition that already exists in the municipal code. I'm sorry, I'm trying to find it here in list replacement. I was trying to find it so I could read it exactly.
And the draft ordinance is posted on the website, so everyone can take a look at that, and of which the definition that was used is in there. Looks like there, Ms. James, you have your hand raised. If we can unmute you.
Hi, can you hear me okay?
We can.
I had a couple of things to say about the SRO hotels from my experience. I've been managing SRO hotels now for 35 years. We happen to own one of the hotels called the Southern Hotel. You probably are familiar with it. And we entered into an agreement with the Housing Commission about 15 years, not the Housing Commission, but the city, 15 years ago, and it's been working out just fine. The only thing is that every year, as a property owner that's going with that way of doing financing, you have to report in. You know this already. But as a process, we have to send out a questionnaire to all the tenants of the building, and they have to produce proof of income. And this proof of income, it's very comprehensive. If they get a check from Social Security, you know, they have to prove how much they get. Now we've found our rooms were restricted to 40% AMI and 45% AMI. But our situation is our tenants, the people that we live with don't make 40% of AMI. 40% would have them making over $15 an hour on a full-time job. But more than half of our tenants get about $1,250 a month usually from Social Security. They're old and they haven't saved anything. So it puts a real burden on them, $100 a month rent. And the real ones that need help, who are living in SRO hotels, could very much use some sort of a government subsidy or a reward for finding a place to live without it gobbling up more than half of their income. When you figure it out, a person that, more than half of the people that live at the Southern Hotel in particular are having to be left with something on the order of $300 a month to live on. Now they do it somehow, by eating a can of food or something like that, because we don't have kitchens. So the biggest problem is getting more ability to the people that live there, rather than trying to restrict us as property owners to pay for moving them to another place. We don't want to move them to another place. We know we're a SRO hotel, and it was not in our plans to be moving anybody. So if you really intend to help the tenant, you ought to look at some sort of grant, or too small for Section 8. But that's a shame, because our tenants can really use the help. They need mental health services. They need medical help. This last year has really been difficult because of the COVID-19 epidemic. It would have been real nice for someone to help us with the impact of trying to get 300 or 400 people equipped with masks and someone to check on the old people, but nobody helped. Nobody came to help us. Same thing for the hepatitis outbreak. Same thing for our elevators and plumbing systems. We seem to be on our own with the caretaking of a lot of people. And we should be looking at this from the other direction and not trying to corral up property owners and make them do something that they're doing already. So I have a lot that I could tell you about this, but I don't want to take up so much time. So I'll put it back to you at this point.
Thank you for that perspective and for sharing your experience, James. We do have a couple more questions in the chat that are coming in. And then to Debbie, your question, you are more than welcome to put the phone up to an Alliance member to ask a question. So we can do that after we take this next question in the chat, which is from Jennifer, of how we determined the initial list of properties. And so we did go over that. And I think if Chuck wants to answer how those determinations or the process is proposed in the ordinance, and Marcus can jump in with any further clarification.
Yeah, I don't think I have much to add from it. It's specifically set forth in the ordinance, the proposed ordinance. It includes those hotels that were originally on a list that was created back in the early days of the SRO ordinance process, and that has come forward. So those are included, provided they did not opt out of being an SRO on or before December 31st, 2003, and provided that they obtained a building permit before January 1, 1990. So those are pretty clearly defined. In addition, to the extent there are properties that exist that meet the definitions of an SRO hotel and that have been operated as that, there's an ability for a designation to be made, but then can be challenged by the owner through a regulated process to provide due process. So that's not much different than what I said before, but that's the definition that exists, and that's the way it would operate.
Thanks, Chuck, for going over that again. For Jennifer jumped on a second late, so I appreciate you taking that time. And another question is, any ordinance, zoning, or building code that allows the construction of new SRO units in San Diego? And that's more specific to the city. We had asked, but I think Wendy, I'm not sure if there's anything you can reference.
Thanks, Molly. First, I wanted to just mention that I added to the chat the definition of SRO hotel. I couldn't find it in the draft because it was removed because it's found in another place of the municipal code. So you have it in the chat. As far as the development of new SRO hotels, the city is permitting. They have done a few. It's from what we understand, it's not a real straight line thing. So they're working on that. But this ordinance that we're talking about here deals with existing SROs, and that's why you don't see that type of provision here. The development of a new SRO hotel would be regulated under the Land Development Code in in the section where they talk about regulated uses and what uses are allowed in what zones and what type of structures they are. There are ways to develop new SROs. However, I believe they're looking at that and maybe thinking of putting them in a different use category, such as an efficiency dwelling unit. So, but the city would really, they're the experts there.
Thanks, Wendy. And Debbie, we'll turn it over to you. We'll unmute you and then allow you to put your phone up. I think you're muted.
Thank you very much. I have Mr. Jeff Platt on the phone. Jeff?
Thank you. This is a little hard. My contact to the web took me to the YouTube version, so I'm a little delayed on what's going on here. So I apologize if I've covered something that's been covered before. But I'm speaking as the president of the SRO Alliance, and we find this ordinance to be problematic, really, and I'll address from 4 different perspectives: process, fairness, constitutionality, and impact. Starting with process, none of the members of the SRO Alliance were involved with the initial drafting of the 13 points that Wendy went through early on. So all of us got in late. Since then, we have had conversations. We submitted a letter to the San Diego Housing Commission on March 1st, 2021, which continues to be unanswered. And we see nothing in the proposed ordinance that reflects any of our comments or concerns. Secondly, let's address fairness. Without any compensation, subsidy, or support from any city, county, state, or federal agency, we provided support for the San Diego Housing Commission's mission to house and support the most vulnerable population for over 50 years. And instead of acknowledging our funding on 50 years of providing this public benefit, we're rewarded with the essential expropriation of our assets. I mean, the old saying about no good deed goes unpunished. Let's talk about the constitutionality of this. The U.S. Constitution's Fifth Amendment guarantees that private property should not be taken for public use without just compensation, and was designed to bar governments from forcing some people alone to bear public burdens, which in all fairness and justice should be borne by the public as a whole. This ordinance is an attempt to circumvent the Fifth Amendment and to benefit by eminent domain, absent the constitutionality required compensation. Or, the probably most important, the outcome of the ordinance will result in blight in our neighborhoods. Not only does this ordinance significantly increase the cost of operating an SRO and discourages investment in these aging assets, but incredulously actually penalizes ownership from trying to improve the assets and living conditions. The proposed ordinance's message to the SRO ownership community is stop investing and stop improvements. And the messaging to the residents is the city will not tolerate improvements in living conditions. This is clearly misguided. The draft of the ordinance really fails the sniff test for process, fairness, constitutionality, and impact, and really represents a significant step backwards towards fulfilling the mission of the San Diego Housing Commission. I really encourage the Housing Commission to let's start over and find a way to incentivize desired behavior instead of penalizing owners and residents. In the long run, a little bit of honey works much better to incentivize than bringing out the club. I thank you for the opportunity to address this well-meaning but misguided proposed ordinance. Thank you.
Thanks for that feedback. As we referenced in the presentation, we have been having public meetings and conversations about these amendments to the ordinance since June of 2020, including multiple land use and housing meetings with the amendments publicly drafted for conversation. We do have receipt of your letter and we'll be responding after we finalize our stakeholder engagement. And so we will be getting back to you. But thank you. And with that, there's no other questions in the chat and no hands raised. So I think we've gone through the questions for today. Again, we can put up maybe the last slide for 1 second, Marcus, just to show the email address for any additional questions. There we go. So SRO Hotel Ordinance at sdhc.org or the address at the San Diego Housing Commission. Oh, and someone just let me know that James has your hand raised. We can unmute you, James, for a question.
Yes, the question I have is, you refer to us as stakeholders and people that ought to know about these meetings and proposals and ordinances, but I never get notified. Maybe it comes in bulk mail. I don't know where you send a notice, but I'm the person on the property ownership and the tax bill. I don't know how you can miss notifying me of these meetings and things that have taken place when we never get a notice, a call, an email, nothing. So I'm saying you've been holding meetings because we're not notified. We're left out of the loop. So that's from the SRO hotel point of view. Thank you.
Thanks, James. We'll connect with you after to confirm that we have the correct information, or I don't know if you can put your number in the chat so I can connect with you offline. That would be helpful. Okay, well, thank you everyone for participating today. We look forward to further conversations and communication when we know and anticipate the next steps for going to committee. So with that, we'll end the webinar.